Live recording. So here we go. Clutch job. Screwdriver in between the brake vanes to hold the disc still because I've got no friends and no one can hold the brake. This is me now undoing the 30mm drive shaft nut. I believe it's 30mm. Don't quote me. There we go. Undid it by hand. Pointlessly finished it off with the whizzer. Have a bit of a sing-song. Wipe your hands on your trousers. That's what they're made for. Then you want to take a 5mm hex and a 17mm spanner. Struggle for a little bit too long trying to undo it. There we go. Zip, zip, zop. And it's off. Bonk it out the back. Put the nut back on to protect the threads. It's a good rule of thumb. Now we're undoing the steering joint, whatever you want to call it. Track rod end with a 19mm spanner. Buff. Everything's coming off quite easy here because I greased everything with silicone paste when I took this off the first time. Again, as you can see, leave the nut on so you don't damage the threads while you're bashing it out with a hammer. Undo it, pop it out, nut back on. Nice and easy. My God, I'm going to cough. I'm going to now undo the upright bolts. These are 17s, I believe. There you go. I've had to swap here. Well, hang on. There we go. Can't do it with the 3/8. Far too weak, these little noodly arms. Take a look at it, because obviously it's the tool's fault and not me. And now we're pulling out the big 1/2 incher and using that instead. A little bit more leverage. Away we go. So once you've got the bolts undone, you obviously want to remove the nuts. Probably didn't need to hit them with a hammer here, but I did. Just gives it, easy to grab onto. And then you start wiggling, and you can pull out the bolts. Nice and easy. Not bad, not bad. Now this bit, not ideal. Stretching the brake line, probably better to undo it, but we're all lazy. You're exactly the same, you just don't film yourself and put it on the internet. I'm now putting the drive shaft nut back on so I can whack it with a hammer. Bing. Just to free up the splines inside the hub. Again, I did this recently and greased everything so it came on nice and easy. I say nice and easy. Here's me messing with the hammer. Trying to get it out with a hammer. Obviously it doesn't work. Yep. Shit, you're an idiot. Don't know what I was thinking. Try and push it out with an extension. Again, doesn't work. Don't know what I was thinking. Onto the nuclear option. Hammer and extension. Bashing it out. You want to be careful of the CV boot here, because you can snag it on the bottom of the strut. I got lucky. Do not look at the ABS cable. Sorry, the wheel speed sensor cable. It's under a lot of tension, but it still works. But I wouldn't do that if I were you. Maybe take it off from either end just to release the tension. But like I said, we're all lazy buggers, so we'll just fight it. Right, once I've got everything loose, I'm going to put the bolts for the strut back in just so there is no more tension on those, on the brake line or the wheel speed sensor, just while it's sat. Here we go. Do them up loose because obviously you're going to have to take them back off eventually. But that is this side done. It didn't take too long. I think it took me 15 minutes in real life. With all the jump cuts, it's been, about 5 in the video. I've got a slightly different angle on the next one, on the other side, so I'll show you some of those. But really, it's quite simple to do this. So yeah, that's step 1. Here we go. This is the other side. Screwdriver in. Undo the bolt. There we go. That was hard. Whiz it off straight away this time. No messing. The second side is always quicker than the first. And look at that. That's why you grease everything. Moving nice and smooth. Undo the two 17s again on the strut. then move straight across to the 19 on the track rod end. You can see the drop link has moved in the background. I undid that, but you couldn't see it on screen, so I cut it out. But you get the idea. There we go, undo that. Hit the bottom just to free up the surfaces. You can see it's tapered, so once you do them up, they can get wedged in there quite good. Decided to whiz these off on this side. Just make life a little bit easier, I suppose. Tap the bolts through. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle as you pull the bolts. There we go. There you go. I'm not going to show you stretching those, stretching that brake line. Obviously mess around and pop the drive shaft out. And refit everything in reverse order. Well, not everything. You just want to do the hub bolts back up, just so you're not stretching that brake line and that wheel speed sensor while it's sat there. There you have it. That is the same process from a different angle. Moving from the underbelly to the overbelly. First off, you want to disconnect the hose clamp from the little coolant hose. Here you can see I'm wiggling it off, pushing it back, and then you pop off the hose. There we go. And grab the coolant expansion tank and wiggle and pull up, and it will disconnect itself from the battery tray. You then want to do this 10mm and disconnect the air intake pipe before moving on to the battery terminals. Zip. There we go, she's off. And then you want to remove the battery tie down on the left hand side of the battery, and then you can grab the battery, pull it up and remove it. You then want to remove these 4 bolts from the battery tray. The ECU is connected to the battery tray, so what you want to do is, if you look behind the ECU, you'll see 2 hinge mechanisms that you can push down on, and they will disengage the plugs for the ECU. Here you can see me faffing around with the gear selector cables. You want to pull back on the yellow bit, pull it away from the metal that it's clamped into. You'll see the teeth disengage, and then you can pop the gear selector cables up and out of the bracket that they're installed into. And there we go. From here you can remove the gear selector linkage. One of them was cable tied on, the other one I could remove with a pry bar. You then want to remove the 2 bolts that secure the slave cylinder for the clutch. Down here is a small earth that connects the battery to the gearbox, and then there's a bracket that you need to remove that holds the coolant hose to the gearbox. Once that's done, you want to remove the wiring loom that runs down the back of the engine. There's multiple points that this connects to the gearbox on. I'll highlight the conduit that you need to remove, but it's best that you just feel around and remove all the bits that you find where it's connected. Once you're done faffing around with all the stuff on top, you can start on doing the gearbox bolts. So there's 3 at the front of the gearbox, as you can see there. You want to do the bracket for the gear select cables. There's 2 bolts there, a 17 and a 14. Going underneath, here's the bracket for the gearbox mount. There's 3 bolts there, not 2. There's another one further up. There you go, there's a 17mm nut on a stud there. 2 10mm and 2 12mm underneath. And then there's 3 14mm there. More 14s on the engine torque mount. There's 3 on this bracket. I'll show you the last one at the end. And if you look up there, you can see there's a bolt. I missed this in the first voiceover, but highlighted is another bolt that you need to remove to get the gearbox off. And the end of a bolt coming from the other side that you want to undo. And there's the final 14. I don't show it in this clip, but you also need to undo the airbox. It's just 4 10mm bolts from the top. Nothing crazy, but it is mounted to the gearbox. So you do need to undo that. From here, you can see we jack up the engine. Just the engine. That little block of wood there is used to protect the engine. The aluminium sump. And then here you can see we're faffing around undoing the bolts. Nothing crazy. Oh, having a beer. Should probably blur that out. And then you can see we remove the gearbox. Once you've undone all the bolts, it comes apart quite easy. Just remember to support the engine so you don't damage any of your engine mounts. But that is the gearbox out of the car. This next clip shows the old LUK clutch versus the new XZE clutch. Here I'm installing the clutch release bearing. You want to get this little tab up over that pin and then slot the bottom in. Make sure it's underneath the pin below. And then you can just wiggle the release bearing onto the shaft. It's a little bit awkward, but it's nothing crazy. There you go. You can see it's on there. And then I'm just using the fork at the top to make sure it's actuating properly. Once you've got the clutch release bearing installed, you can go back and reinstall the flywheel. If you haven't taken this off, you obviously can skip the step. I've never had a clutch flywheel resurfaced and I've never had a problem, so I'd risk it. Here you can see I'm installing the flywheel bolts with Loctite 603. This retaining compound is a high strength retaining compound. It's designed for bearings, so it's probably a little bit overkill for these bolts, but I don't want them coming undone. Here you can see I'm just putting them in by hand initially. I tighten them with an electric ratchet before moving on to torquing them in a star pattern. It's generally good practice for any circular pattern bolts to do them in a star pattern. I'm now installing the clutch plate and the clutch pressure plate. You can't really get this wrong. It's pinned to the flywheel, so it will only go in one way. Here I'm bashing it with my hand, and I smash my finger quite bad on the thermostat housing here. It's on. I'm doing these bolts up, but I'm doing them loosely, so I can still move the clutch plate around in the middle of the pressure plate. This lets me line it up. This is me lining it up now. What you want to do is stare deep into the flywheel through the spigot bearing, and you want to line the clutch splines up with the back of the flywheel. As long as everything's concentric and you can kind of see that the circles of the flywheel and then the clutch plate form kind of like an even boundary around each other. It's hard to explain, but it makes sense when you're looking at it. The gearbox will go on fine. You really want to get your head up in there and make sure it's all lined up. Take your time. You don't really want to be doing this twice. I have already tightened these up with the electric ratchet, but here you can see me torquing them all up. And there we go. That's the clutch install. So here you can see I've just quickly modelled up a clutch spring plate and the flywheel underneath. The spring plate is obviously on the top, the clutch is the toothed thing in the middle, and then the spigot bearing and the flywheel is at the bottom. When I'm talking about lining them up so that you can slide the gearbox in nice and easy, you want to form concentric circles with all of these elements. So you'll see this is offset, and you can see the gap on one side of the bearing is smaller than the gap on the other. This is an extreme example, but this is what you're aiming to avoid, because that will stop the input shaft sliding in as easy. Here I'm dragging it round so that all of those elements are concentric, and you just want to create these even gaps around all of the elements of the assembly. Once you've aligned the clutch, place a jack under the engine like you did when removing the gearbox. Place the gearbox under the car and lift it up into position. There's a stud on the gearbox and a couple of locating pins that you need to line up at this point as well. Then you can align the shaft, the input shaft, to the centre of the flywheel and push the gearbox towards the engine. If everything's lined up properly, it should slide together quite nicely with a satisfying clunk when the gearbox and engine are mated. If it's not sliding together, double check your clutch alignment and try again. Make sure the gearbox is rotated correctly and that stud and those like locating pins are aligned as well. Just a tip, if it's not going together, don't try to force it by doing the bolts up or anything. If you can get it on a little bit of the way, and then you can start putting the bolts on. By doing them up, you can crack the gearbox housing. You should be able to align it and make the gearbox and the engine by hand. So once it's all lined up and the gearbox and the engine is mated, you can start reinstalling all the gearbox mounts. I started with the one on the front for this and then moved to the one at the back. It was easier that way. Once you've got the front one done up, you can move the jack that's under the engine out of the way to give you some more space to do the rear gearbox mount. But that's it. Reassembly is the opposite of disassembly. So get your gearbox in. You can do all the bolts up, then reconnect your gear linkages, put the battery tray on, airbox, roll underneath the car, put your drive shafts in. Make sure you put the drive shafts in before you fill up the gearbox, or all of the gearbox oil will just come out of the diff. But yeah, pretty simple to put it all back together. It took me, I think, an hour and a half once I got the gearbox in to put everything back on. Admittedly, I've done this a couple of times, but yeah, not a crazy job. And once you've taken it all off, you're familiar with where the bolts are and all that sort of stuff, so it does make it a little bit easier. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In the next one, I'm going to be replacing the input shaft bearings of this gearbox. It's a common problem on these, so hopefully that will help people as well. I decided to split it into 2 videos, as I thought some people might just want to know how to change the clutch, and others will need to rebuild the gearbox. But thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next one.